And in Aaron's absence, it's my honor to introduce our speaker today, Louis Bayard. He's an American author and a former instructor at George Washington University. His reviews and articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and Salon, and his work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. I first encountered his work, I am chastened to say, watching the wonderful Netflix film the Pale Blue Eye, starring Christian Bale and Harry Melling and Gillian Anderson and others, that was based on his novel. And it is about this fellow here, plays a big role in it, Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. So do watch it. It's on Netflix and was a big hit there. He also wrote Jackie and Me, which was ranked by the Washington Post as one of the top novels of 2022. And he's here today because his most recent novel, The Wilds, was chosen as one of the top 10 historical novels of the year by the New York Times, and also as one of the books of the year by the Washington Post. It's a brilliantly original, profoundly empathetic story about Oscar Wilde's wife, Constance, and their two sons in the aftermath of Oscar's imprisonment for homosexuality. And it's told against the backdrop of Victorian England and World War I. And in his acknowledgments, he thanks our patron Merlin Holland for fielding questions about Vyvyan Holland and prays he will excuse those moments where fiction departs from history, a sentiment he extends to the Oscar Wilde Society. And with that, over to you.
Oh, well, thank you, Darcy, for that lovely introduction. It's great to see you all tonight. I need to start before we get into the official reason that I'm here. I need to share with you an Oscar Wildish experience I had yesterday. So the way to begin this is I fell through the floor of my kitchen. And the reason that this happened is because our kitchen is being renovated, which means it first has to be demolished. I'm sure a lot of you have been through this experience. And so coming home from the cafe where I've been taking my laptop every day to stay out of the way of the contractors, I was presented with a kitchen that was just really a stripped row of parallel beams. I thought, well, how hard can this be to cross to the other side of that? It was, at the age of 61, it turned out to be rather hard. So I plunged through. I was rescued by a contractor. And in the act of thanking him, I looked down at my hand and noticed that I'm bringing up to the light here, that my middle finger was twisted, bent north by northwest, if I may say. So it was more of a visual, the shock was more visual than organic. I didn't actually feel any pain at that point, but it was decided that I should seek medical treatment. They offered to take me to a hospital, but I said, you know what, there's an urgent care clinic just around the corner, I'll go there. It was only while I was on the way there that I realized the urgent care clinic, in the manner of bureaucratic and health institutions everywhere, is the opposite of urgent, which is to say that no matter when you go there, there will be roughly between 16 and 24 people sitting in the waiting room, all of whom have abandoned any hope of ever being seen again. There's a certain timelessness to their waiting. It seems like they've been waiting there for all eternity and will indeed wait for the rest of eternity. If you've seen the last act of Our Town, imagine the dead of Grover's Corner coming forward and sitting in chairs and staring straight out with no expectations of the universe anymore. They've abandoned any hope. So that is kind of the feeling you get walking into the urgent care clinic. And I looked at the Grover's Corners people, and I thought, gosh, I don't know if I have time to wait here for an eternity. And I then had an inspiration, which was to flash my then very bent finger to the attending nurse. She took one look at it and said, go straight back. And I met there a burly osteopath named Joe, who said, we can do this slow or we can do this fast. I said, I opt for fast. He said, in that case, close your eyes. I closed my eyes. Within 3 seconds, my finger had been bent back into something like a natural alignment. And as it was being bundled into this lovely splint, I thought, gosh, that was an Oscar Wildean moment, an intrusion of melodrama into an otherwise droll and indeed paradoxical situation, an urgent care clinic where nothing, in fact, is urgent. So I think Oscar spirit was with me in that moment, and I'm glad to say that his spirit still walks abroad, and and hallelujah for that. So let me begin the official program by telling you how much I've been looking forward to tonight. I consider it my way of repaying, or at least owning, my debt to the Oscar Wilde Society, because I have benefited in such a meaningful way from the scholarship of your members, one of whom I know is here tonight, but I won't embarrass him yet. I won't embarrass him yet. Let me now segue to a disclaimer. I have now written 9 historical novels about the likes of Lincoln and Edgar Allan Poe and the great Elizabethan scientist Thomas Harriot. Never once did I become anything remotely resembling an expert on the topic I was writing about. As I like to tell readers, I learned just enough to be able to tell my story. So for all the real Wilde scholars in the audience, and I know you're out there, I bow in advance to your superior knowledge. And I hope you won't force me to play Oscar Wilde trivia, over darts or something. At least not without a beer in my hand. That would make it okay. Ironically, though, I wrote this book to address another kind of knowledge deficit, which certainly exists on my side of the pond and maybe yours, wherever your pond is. Whenever I talk about the Wildes to an American audience, I begin by asking 2 questions. How many of you know Oscar Wilde had a wife? How many of you know he had children? In response to both questions, only a small minority of audience members actually raise their hands. That's when I assure everyone else in the room that they needn't feel sheepish or ashamed for not raising their hands, because for 125 years, our culture has kept Oscar in the close-fitting garb of gay Victorian martyrdom, humiliated, imprisoned, and ultimately destroyed for committing acts of gross indecency with other men and for defending, in a phrase that I'm sure you know is not his, the love that dare not speak its name. Today, he'll be glad to know that love is very much in the habit of speaking its name, even in these troubled Trumpian times. In his case, it's other loves that get crowded out. And it's no disservice to Oscar or his place in the queer pantheon to point out that, like so many men before and after him, he followed the path of heterosexual marriage and parenthood, and that rather than slough off that old identity, clung to it to the last. At the risk of outing him all over again, Oscar Wilde was a family man, and that's what this book is about. So let's put things in their proper historical context. For the first 3 decades of his life, scholars agree that Oscar Wilde was, for all intents and purposes, heterosexual. His romantic attachments were to such famous beauties as Lily Langtry and Florence Balcombe, who would later become Mrs. Bram Stoker, another fraught Victorian alliance. So it's no surprise that in 1881, he fell in love with a beautiful young Anglo-Irish woman named Constance Lloyd. They met in her grandmother's parlor in Dublin. Before he had spent even an hour in her company, he was murmuring to his mother, and of course his mother was there. She had to have been there, right? By the by, I think of marrying that girl. To be clear, Constance Lloyd was no mere girl. She was a confident young woman, well-educated, multilingual, a progressive reformer who believed it was time to liberate Victorian women from their corsets. I'm sure I can get an amen from the women in the audience about that. And who found in her new suitor an entirely sympathetic audience. I think another thing people don't know about Oscar is he edited a women's magazine during the 1880s and did it with great gusto and spirit. So Oscar and Constance were married in a small ceremony at St. James. They honeymooned in Paris, where they fraternized with the likes of, their old pal Sarah Bernhardt, for whom Salome was written. And they made their home in the famous number 16 Tite Street, Chelsea. One of Oscar's friends at the time proclaimed that he was, quote, quite madly in love. By way of evidence, here is the document that actually begins the Wildes. It's an actual letter, not written by me, but no doubt familiar to many of you, from Oscar to Constance, dated December 18th, 1884. By the way, whenever I read this letter to American audiences, I do it in my best English accent, imbibed from my English mother, because that's how I hear it in my head. I would not dream of foisting this accent on the Oscar Wilde Society. But if you're masochistic, you may listen to it on the audiobook. And here we go. Dear and beloved, here I am, and you at the antipodes. Oh, execrable facts that keep our lips from kissing, though our souls are one. What can I tell you by letter? Alas, nothing that I would tell you. The messages of the gods to each other travel not by pen and ink, and indeed your bodily presence here would not make you more real, for I feel your fingers in my hair, and your cheek brushing mine. The air is full of the music of your voice. My soul and body seem no longer mine, but mingled in some exquisite ecstasy with yours. I feel incomplete without you. Ever and ever yours, Oscar. Well, clearly this is not what the French would call a mariage blanc, not an arranged marriage, but a passionate meeting of equals. In short order, as we all know, they had two sons, Cyril and Vyvyan, and they lived by all accounts an exemplary family life. Oscar was deeply devoted to his boys, and they to him. Unlike other Victorian fathers, he would get down on all fours in the nursery and pretend to be a lion or a wolf or a horse. Caring nothing, his son would later write, for his usually immaculate appearance. And we know that appearance, right, from so many photographs. Oscar swam with his boys. He took them fishing, made sandcastles. He mended their toys, and at night sang Irish songs badly, or fashioned tales of happy princes and selfish giants. In short, the stuff of his own enduring children's stories. All through this, of course, Oscar's career was on the ascendant, first with the publication of his scandalous novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and then with the enormous success of his play, Lady Windermere's Fan. More plays would follow, more successes. And when we meet the Wildes at the beginning of my novel, they have become, in effect, one of England's first families. But trouble is about to enter this paradise. I think it was Tolstoy who said long ago that there are really only two stories in the world. You go on a journey or a stranger comes to town. Pretty much every story that's ever been written can fit in one of those two templates. So this is a case of a stranger coming to town. And he's an extraordinary kind of stranger, a strange stranger. His name is Lord Alfred Douglas, or Bosie, as his intimates call him. Bosie is beautiful, he is charming, he is mercurial, and he is about to change everything. By now, Oscar, without his wife's knowledge, has discovered and embraced his sexuality, his true sexuality, or his current sexuality. We can talk about that. But Bosie represents a much larger threat, not just a sexual partner, but a love object. I'm sure everyone out there knows at least the outlines of what follows within a few years. Yes, Oscar will launch a ruinous lawsuit against Bosie's father, the Marquis of Queensberry. He will be sentenced to 2 years hard labor, and he will become the center of an international scandal. We know this, right? The story that too often gets ignored is how that same scandal swept up his wife and children. They had to flee England. They had to change their names and addresses, and to a large extent, their destinies. It's a desperately sad and often tragic story. And I realized early on that simply leaning into the tragedy would make the book as depressing to write as it would be to read. See, it takes me 2 years on average to push a book into the world. So I need to be kind of happy about it when I get up in the morning. I need to be able to greet it. Hello, book. I can't wait to work on you. So that was a struggle at first, but in rereading Oscar's work, I realized that one of his primary lessons is that tragedy is never too far removed from its cousin, comedy, just as melodrama is never too far removed from drollery. And it's this principle that emboldened me to create, as the subtitle says, where's the book? Here we go. This is the paperback, by the way, which has just come out. Here we are. A novel in 5 acts, which takes both its structure and tone from the deliciously multifarious plays that Oscar, in this key moment of his career, was bequeathing to our literature. The action of the book takes us from 1892 to 1925, from Norfolk to the Ligurian coast of Italy, to a foxhole in northeast France, to an underground nightclub in London. Among the real-life characters who strut and fret their hour on the stage are Lady Wilde, Oscar's redoubtable mother, a fierce Irish Republican known to her admirers, of course, as Speranza. Any resemblance between her and Lady Bracknell is purely intentional. There's also Lady Brooke, equally bossy, whose official title was the Rani of Sarawak. Yes, back in those days, Sarawak had white Rajas and white Ranis. I think they had them until the early 20th century. There is a shady Italian doctor, also real, a stalwart family lawyer, also real, and let's not forget Bosie, who is the ticking time bomb beneath Brooke's whole surface. The result, I hope, is high comedy that descends at key moments into the sorrows of the human heart, and then asks ultimately if the Wildes might have remained the family they dearly wished to be. Those of you who have read the book, and thank you for that in advance, know that I take some fairly significant liberties with the factual record. I make no apologies for that. Being a novelist, I have no conscience to speak of. I don't. But in the same breath, I do have the greatest, deepest gratitude for the historians who helped me animate this lost world, because God knows I couldn't have done it without them. I'm speaking of biographers like Eleanor Fitzsimmons, known to you all, and Franny Moyle and Douglas Murray, who did a very helpful biography of Lord Alfred Douglas. But there are three people in particular I want to salute from this little puppet. The first is Matthew Sturgis, who kindly consented to an interview and whose excellent biography, I think it was released 2 or 3 years late in America, I don't know why, helped me locate the exact historical moment when the Wilde family began to unravel. To help me figure out what was exactly happening in that moment in that Cromer, Norfolk farmhouse, I owe a great debt to Mr. Jeff Dibb. I won't embarrass him by making him salute himself, acknowledge himself if he's still here. But if you are here, Jeff, please know that your 2 articles in the Wildian, I believe, were indispensable in figuring out the when and the how and the with whom of this deeply fraught family holiday. And I think I dragooned Jeff into an interview as well. He was very kind to do that. Finally, I will just add, excuse me while I get a swig of water. One of the great privileges of writing this book was exchanging emails with Merlin Holland, excuse me. Merlin Holland. As astonished as people are to hear that Oscar Wilde had a wife and children, they are equally astonished to hear that he has a living grandson. More than merely living, working very hard on behalf of Wildians everywhere. Before year is out, I'm giving to understand October, I think, he will be releasing another volume of scholarship into the world, which is an occasion for celebration, to be sure. It was such an honor to learn from Mr. Holland, and it is an honor to keep alive the names and stories of his ancestors. I hope if you pick up my book, which is now in paperback, I should reinforce that you enjoy their company as much as I did, because I dearly loved being in their company for the 2 years it took me to write it. Finally, let me conclude with a naked and abject plea, which you are free to ignore. 5 of my books, extending all the way back to Mr. Timothy in 2003, have enjoyed the privilege of UK publishers. For reasons that escape me, The Wilde still lacks one, which means that Oscar lovers like you have to submit yourself to the yokes of Jeff Bezos and his ilk. As a writer for the Washington Post, I know what it's like, the Bezos yoke. It's heavy. So no pressure, but if any of you have any contacts in the London publishing world, please tell them that to invoke Mr. Barkis from David Copperfield, Bayard is willing. With that, I conclude my presentation and await any questions you might have. Even the stumpers, bring them on. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bayard, for that excellent talk. I am always glad to have a speaker who relishes speaking and treats it like a conversation and not a recital. So thank you very much. And with that, would anybody like to ask a question?
Yes, could I just say something, Darcy, please?
Go ahead,
Hello,
Jeff.
Hi, Lou. Thank you for your kind words. I was here masquerading behind a man wearing a rather exotic dressing gown. Thanks for the mention. And has your book been published, by the way?
Oh yes, it was in the States. It was published a year ago. So yes, it's been available, as I said, on Amazon and other of those titles. Okay. So for a year, but now the change is it's now in paperback. So cheaper, because I know I hate paying full good money for hardbacks. So I'm always about the paperbacks. Anyway, so
Okay.
it's out there. It's just not going to be on UK bookstores shelves. And but that may change. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go looking for it. And
Well, please do. And Jeff, I had a great time chatting with you and getting to know about Norfolk and all those good things. And again,
yeah.
you were such a help.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You're welcome. Anytime. Cheers.
Cheers.
While other people are thinking of their question, I have a question for you, which is, The Pale Blue Eye is very different from this novel. The Pale Blue Eye is a fictional story with real characters in it. And although you say this is a work, The Wilds is a work of fiction, which of course it is, it's also based much more heavily in reality, I think, than The Pale Blue Eye. Why the change in direction?
That's a very good question. I think it owes something to the direction of my career. I think I had gone to a point where I had just finished out a 2-book contract with a publisher, a New York publisher. My editor had been fired, so I was one of those. It's a pretty common phenomenon in the American publishing anyway. The orphaned author. What happens is your editor gets fired from under you. Your publishing team, they go, and you're left with people who didn't really want you there in the first place. They do a good job of hiding that, but you know you're not really welcome. So this is one of the cases where I was like, okay, they don't want me, and God, sounds like a naked plea for pathos, and I apologize for that, but this is just the way publishing works, at least in the States. I have no idea about the UK, but so I got to. It's like, okay, the contract is done. Nobody's expecting anything. Nobody's knocking at the door. This was some years after The Pale Blue Eye came out as a book, and before the movie came out. So I thought, well, let's just write the book I kind of want to write. So I wrote a book about Abraham Lincoln and his relationship with Joshua Speed, his best friend through life, and maybe something more than best friend, and with Mary Todd, who I think has gotten a raw deal from history. So I realized that kind of nudged me in a different direction. So The Pale Blue Eye came out of my historical mystery, historical thriller vein, and then I just kind of wandered over in this other direction, which is, I guess you could call it queering history, but also just kind of asking those questions that historians have been asking for many years, just asking them in a fictional context. That was a really long-winded answer to your original question, wasn't it?
Oh, it made a lot of sense. And I have another question here from one of our participants. Could you ask Lewis about researching Cyril, whose life is less well known than those of
Yes.
other members of the Wilde family?
Yes. Cyril to me is the one who broke my heart most thoroughly. I should add that I spent a good deal of the time writing this book either laughing or crying a bit. And I think I cried more for Cyril than for anybody else. If you need any reason why, you just look at the 2 letters that are excerpted that are excerpted in the book. They form one of the entr'actes. This was a young man who was just broken by his family scandal and was sort of wrenched in the direction of toxic, what we call today toxic masculinity. The only way he could kind of undo his father's shame was to become a soldier and then ultimately become a sniper. When I tell people that Oscar Wilde's older son became a World War I sniper, they're astonished. How could that have happened? Well, it was a direct reaction to what went on. So yeah, not a lot on Cyril, but there's a bit about him from Vyvyan. Of course, one of the seminal texts that I consulted was Son of Oscar Wilde by Vyvyan, which came out in, somebody can say for sure, it was in the early 50s at some point, 53, 54. And it gave us a very clear picture of Cyril and also of their family. Decades later, Vyvyan was able to remember these really enchanting moments that they'd all had together in great detail. And that was so helpful to me because I realized that this was a family that just wanted to remain together. And that's what inspires the final act of the book. But Cyril was just sort of, because he didn't live long, and you're right, there's not a big paper trail. So just imagining what that would look like to be him, with the stain of the scandal following him everywhere.
I have a couple more questions. I see people have their hands raised. Before I do, I just want to call out a comment that's in the chat from Margareta saying, I don't have a question, but just to say, I loved this book because Value brought these so much overlooked characters to life, individuals who were so integral to Oscar's life, but have been largely erased. I think that's lovely. Libby, you've got a question.
Yes, I have a question. My question is whether you feel that Oscar was, I don't know, a victim or a subject of bisexual erasure, because he had a wife, he had children, and he also liked men. But
Yeah.
but I've always felt that whenever I brought up the idea that Oscar might have actually just been bisexual, people kind of can get a bit sniffy and either say that no, he was really gay and his marriage to Constance was not real. But I feel that if you say that his marriage to Constance wasn't real, that's a real kick in the teeth for Constance because he absolutely adored her.
He did, absolutely.
And I feel that it was a lot more than a lavender marriage.
Yeah.
So yeah. So what are your thoughts on
Yeah, no,
Oscar?
that's a really great question. And it brings up an interesting issue. You know, when I was a young, clueless gay coming out of the closet, this was a long time ago, I remember thinking that anybody who said he was bisexual, I would just check in with him again 6 months down the road and just see where he still was. You know, I just thought it was a transitional phenomenon. But now, having lived a space of time in this world, I can see, I've come to see the full complexity of human sexuality. And I have no problem thinking that Oscar was genuinely sexually attracted to his wife. And that as I think it was Robbie Ross, right? Who was the first person to kind of guide him through that gate. I will say, once he went through that gate, there was no turning back. But that's not to discount, as you say, the passion that he experienced with his wife in the early years of their marriage. I mean, those two kids happened pretty fast, right? It didn't require a lot of coaxing. So yeah, I always think of him as bisexual going forward, for sure. But yes, but the image that's been propagated through time is of the homosexual. And yeah, it just shows we're not comfortable still as a society talking about sexuality and it's in all its complexity.